The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and afternoon, everybody. As normal, for those that have been on our webinars before, we are going to wait a couple minutes to let everybody jump on. We have Steve Kromer on the screen and John Avina. So stand by and we will get started in about 3 or so minutes.
All right.
Fun, man. Timely.
Do you know any jokes, Steve? I often will tell a joke beforehand. I didn't prepare this time.
I am not a good joke teller. I know funny things.
Okay.
And I can be funny, but I'm a terrible joke teller. I don't know how to deliver them properly. So my humor is a little more opaque.
Okay, so I want to read something then. This is just some food for thought. I've been reading these apocalyptic, so I'm speaking to you, but I'm also speaking to everybody else, just entertaining them. This is kind of me vamping here. I've been reading a lot of apocalyptic novels lately. I'm reading right now, I don't know if you can see this one, it's Oryx and Crake. It's by Margaret Atwood. She's the one that wrote The Handmaid's Tale. Anyway, so I'm going to read a little bit. It's I think it's kind of funny and also really profound and awful. So there's two characters. One's named Crake and the other one is Jimmy. So Crake says, let's suppose for the sake of an argument that civilization as we know gets destroyed. Want some popcorn? Is that real butter? Says Jimmy. Nothing but the best at Watson Crick, said Crake. Once it's flattened, it can never be rebuilt. He's talking about the world. Because why? Got any salt? Because all the available surface metals have already been mined, says Crake, without which no Iron Age, no Bronze Age, no Age of Steel, and all the rest of it. There's metals farther down, but the advanced technology we need for extracting those would have been obliterated. It could be put back together, said Jimmy, chewing. It was so long since he'd tasted popcorn this good, they'd still have the instructions. Actually not, said Crake. It's not like the wheel. It's too complex now. Suppose the instructions survived. Suppose there were any people left with the knowledge to read them. Those people would be few and far between, and they wouldn't have the tools. Remember, no electricity. Then once those people died, that would be it. They'd have no apprentices. They'd have no successors. Want a beer? Is it cold? All it takes, says Craig, is the elimination of one generation of anything. Beetles, trees, microbes, scientists, speakers of French, whatever. Break the link in time between one generation and the next, and it's game over forever. Speaking of games, said Jimmy, it's your move. Anyway, that's our thought for the day.
Man.
I hope that was a boring read, but I found it awful, actually.
Deep thought, John.
It's a really good book. Okay. Hey, Tyler, let's get going.
Yeah, why don't you take it away?
Oh, all right then. Well, welcome everyone. Hey, Tyler, is there a cover slide to show? Maybe there is. Well, there it is. Okay, so today we're talking M&V like we often do. We're speaking with Steve Kromer, and Steve titled this M&V Concepts and Contexts. IPMVP's Original Sin. This is going to be really interesting, and you know this, so I'll be really brief. It's going to be interesting because I'm sure most of you have heard that EVO has new certifications for M&V now. There used to be the CMVP that AEE and EVO were combining, working together with, and now all of a sudden there's these new ones. I don't understand really much of anything about this. I can guess, but I'm not going to guess at this moment. And that's about it. So we're going to talk to Steve Kromer, who I would think he would be one of the, let's say, 3 or 4 people more than anyone who knows what's going on about this. He's going to explain what he thinks about it, or a lot of what he thinks, maybe not everything. And he's also going to answer some just generally good M&V questions that I have, and then some topics he wanted to bring up. Also, I guess I should mention who he is. Steve's been around forever. I think he worked at Lawrence Livermore Labs a long time ago. I guess what, 1980s or something like that?
No.
90s?
90.
90s, yeah. But he's been around the business forever, and he's really centered his work around M&V for all this time. I first met him in Hawaii in 1995, I believe it was, and we've kind of kept in touch all along. He used to work for Enron at one point. He was one of the evil ones, and he was instrumental in the creation. Okay, there's his Enron hat, and he was involved in the creation of the first IPMVP, which was called the NEMVP. And he's been involved with Evo ever since, closer and nearer, farther or closer, and been teaching. He's taught so many of you the CMVP class. That's it. That's the introduction for Steve. Steve, let's just get going. What's going on with Evo and AEE? Why this new certification?
Great. Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Welcome to it looks like 89 or so people on the call right now. So thanks for taking an hour out of your day to join us. I'll just back up a little. John and I had this planned already around the original SIN topic. And that was a way to try and generate interest in this talk, was just, make a little controversy. That arose from recent work on Evo committees where we're still, okay, let's start from there. Evo is Efficiency Evaluation Organization. It's an organization, it's a 501c3, it's registered in Washington, D.C. It's a company, has to make money, has to make revenue, has to pay people. So that's Evo. And yeah, so we are running some committees, and there's always discussions in committees coming up. And I have a thing about words on paper when you're done. What Evo generally does is write documents, right? So, you'll go to their website and pull up a document, or you go to a training, and you'll learn about words that get compressed into a committee. A committee compresses words and thoughts and concepts into a certain set of words that end up on a document, and that's kind of what we promote then. So that's what Evo does. And what AEE does on the other side of that equation is Association of Energy Engineers, a lot of things, but primarily they run certification programs along a lot of topics with energy management. So that's just some background on the two organizations. And what I want to say first and foremost is I'm fortunate to sit here in my house in Berkeley, California, after a career doing M&V. It was not expected, man. 1993 is when this got kicked off, and we were doing the pilot program for Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory for the Department of Energy. And they said, Steve, do you want to take on this job of doing Building 62 shared savings pilot test program, performance contract for the federal government? I said, sure. What's it all about? Well, it's M&V. And I go, what's that? And they said, well, it's how we verify the amounts and stuff in this contracting set. So since that point, 93 to now, this has been my career. And I want to thank, deeply in the bottom of my heart, AEE and Evo and all the other people along the way who, because we have a global audience, man. It's unbelievable, John. The predecessor for your company was Robert Sonderegger. There's this legacy of people, and we're all part of that chain, and I'm part of it. And I'm really just so friggin' honored. So that's where I could stop, but what we got then is two organizations that are trying to make a living in a harsh world and promote what they do well. And, the organizations themselves, I was there before Evo when it was a committee. I was there when we turned it into the IPMVP Inc. when Department of Energy kicked us out. I was the second chair after Shirley Hansen, and I was treasurer, and I was on the board until 2016. And yeah, that was my involvement on that side. With AEE, I trained the M&V course before CMVP was around, back in 96, 97 with Jim Waltz, our colleague. And, so I've been training M&V and all these concepts since way before Evo existed and before CMVP existed. When we formalized into that agreement, that was two organizations that shared this responsibility of putting training materials together and promoting it, first in the US. And then, we launched a really tentative reach out to the world. And we had classes like in South Africa, actually was our first other training partner. Well, guess what? It's 2022. It's February 16th. And I'm on a call this morning with Carol Stein in South Africa. And oh my gosh, what they've developed there is a national set of protocols and additional standards and work around M&V. It's just mind-blowing. So yeah, what's happened is we planted these seeds way back when. They've taken off in different areas at different speeds. And what we got now is a desire for organizations like EVO and AEE to both, promote what they think is their best product. And EVO announced they want to do some certification on the exact same material as the CMVP now, so no technical difference. And at least with the PMVA they've announced. And then they have a PMVE, which is like an additional expert training on top of that, which is actually pretty interesting. I personally think the CMVP could take the PMVE, but that's getting a little bit too into the weeds already. I think that's all I need to say, really. These two organizations have their own, desires for what's next, and it looks like there's going to be competition on the fundamentals class, and absolutely. Just backing up a little bit, the CMVP, as the board chair, I've had the responsibility of helping AEE maintain maintain it as a timely fashion. And so we just went through an exercise of updating the body of knowledge. We had something called a job task analysis. We brought together 9 experts from around the world, and we sat down, and these are experts who serve on all the EVO committees as well. So we sat together and said, what would a modern CMVP need to know to walk out into the world and integrate with all of the various contexts out there, how people are performing M&V. So that updated body of knowledge is now going to be substantiated, and we're going to develop training materials for that. So look really soon for new updated CMVP training materials. So that's on the market.
So you're not, and you probably are not going to, and that's fine. You got to do what you got to do, but you're not going to tell us why then this is happening. I mean, was there some fundamental disagreement between EVO and AEE, or is it about money that EVO needs enough money to pay for their staff? And they're not getting enough in the certifications, or what is it? What was behind this? It sounds like it was a decision by EVO, not by AEE. I don't know though.
So. I don't know because I'm not on the board, but what I know is that everyone in this world wants to have a certain amount of freedom and independence to do things the way they want.
That's right.
And this agreement was signed. It was the only, if I can write, and this is, some people can clear up this later, but when AEE signed the agreement with EVO, it was the first time, if you know AEE, it was Al Tuman. I mean, back then you just called Al Tuman, and this is what Shirley Henson did. We were a brand new so here, Department of Energy says, okay, go forth and survive without any funding from DOE anymore. You're on your own. And we shook down a few utilities around the country in the US, and they gave us $5,000 each. So suddenly we had $35,000 in terms of IPMVP Inc., EVO. That wasn't enough to do anything. So Shirley Henson had the great idea. Let's go to Al Tuman and see if he'll start a new certification. And we'll use this public information that we got from DOE, and we'll promote it and put training together and create a certification. That's how it started. That's what's been happening for 20 years now. So it's 2002, roughly, right after Enron fell. I got very much more involved, and we created that. And again, what we look at as success is a global certification. You can talk to anybody around the world. And by the way, that's something really important to remember about what CMVP is. It is a single global standard. And to the degree you want to look to the future, how important is it that it's a global standard? Well, I happen to believe that's really important. I believe it was something we didn't really envision would be this successful. And now that it is this successful, I think it's something we stand to lose if we don't focus on having the international, width, sort of breadth to it. So I think that's something, it's at risk, actually.
Yeah, certainly.
Again, but I don't begrudge anybody the desire to think they can do it better, or do it more, or integrate more markets and have more innovation. That's all fine. And I think that's what's driving. It's a real, honest, sincere desire on parts of everyone to do what they think is the best way to promote M&V, right? And there's differences of opinion on that.
Could this have anything, the roots having to do with the fact that AE is mostly ESCO and federal and energy managers, and EVO is a large percentage of them are utility people, and they be differently than the rest of the world?
Well, let's see. We've gotten into the segue, John, to the original sin, the part of this the title for this.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, because we just talked about how did we get here. It was a lot of hard work from honest and sincere organizations working hard with a partnership who have a little moment here where they're having a little spat. It's my hope that this is a blip and that people, cooler heads prevail, and we all look down the road to the future, and we come up with a really good plan for the world, for M&V, for how to train and certify fundamentals. That's the thing that's the little kernel, the certification of fundamentals. Now, when you talk to the issue is the when we formed IPMVP, and I say we, and I mean that means all the committees and people that came together back in Washington D.C. and around the world, around the country, in '94, '95 when we were holding the committee meetings. And that was NASCO, but it was also utility programs, custom programs. It was Texas A&M, a large part. New Jersey protocols were there, and Lawrence Berkeley Lab that I represented. And in a committee, again, when a committee comes together, you end up with something that's compressed, right? You lose compression of any information. You lose something. So the compression of information that was lost, what was lost when we put together IPMVP, was all the context was going to be implied in. So and that even went further in 2014 when Evo came out with core concepts. We compressed it even further into like 15 pages. And we said, okay, when you compress, you lose, what's the word in music? I forget. Anyway, there's it's what Neil Young complains about actually all the time on digital music. You don't get the full sound. If you don't get the full sound, you don't get the full meaning. So when you have a committee and you write a document and you take core concepts and you pack them down in, you lose a lot of the nuances of how they're going to be applied. Now, how you apply the single simple core concept of IPMVP, it comes down to something called the counterfactual argument, right? It's the pre-post. Can you assess a system, document what it's doing, and then use that to compare in the future what actually happens? That's a super, super simple concept. Everything after that is...
Stop. Can you define counterfactual for those of us who...
Yeah, look it up. It's, again, the simple concept that you're doing something now and you're going to be doing it in the future, right? So you're going to be running your building and burning energy. You're doing it now. You can test how much you're using. And you know now, a year from now, when you sign a contract, you want to be able to compare what happens then, which is easy to measure, to what would have happened. So the counterfactual method is saying, let's take some information now that allows us to project and forecast what. Okay. So a year from now, we have something that's solid to compare against, that everyone agrees that's the comparator. So it's setting up that comparator, but it's also playing the game in real time, knowing you have to do that in the future, right? I'm going to have to put together an M&V plan that's going to hold water in the future when all the people come back together and say, well, what would have happened? What if I adjust for weather or COVID or all these things? But that's a really simple concept. And yes, what happened when we formed it was that there was large representation by, guess what? The Federal Energy Management Program. And guess what? The FEMP document got written first because as the project manager for that, I was under a really tight schedule. So when we brought all the experts in the country together, originally we were supposed to just write one for the federal government, but Greg Katz and Art Rosenfeld, got us to expand it out to the whole commercial interest of all the ESCOs. So suddenly we were writing a document, a standard or protocol for all of everyone doing performance contracting or energy efficiency. And then FEMP got out of the gates first and wrote their document, but FEMP was the first application. So FEMP was context specific. So the general concept is the counterfactual argument. The specific context for FEMP was federal performance contracting. Now, to work in that context, you had to go take a 3-day course on procurement, right? And what does it mean? How are the maintenance costs going to get built in? And what about what happens, the expected useful life and all those weird little things that fit into energy efficiency, quantification, they were all defined in the FEMP context. So what's interesting to me is that from the very beginning, it was implied that IPMVP was a general framework. It was absolutely useful for informing people and training them on the concepts, but it was almost worthless until you had put it into a context and defined how you're going to use it. So this morning, I'm on a call with the guy in South Africa, with Carol, and he's saying, yeah, we had that problem early on. It's mainly written for projects, but we were actually able to take IPMVP and reform it into our programs as well. And that was originally utility programs, and now it's tax programs. But they they did that through a really amazing. They are probably the world's leader in taking IPMVP and building it into their entire culture, so to speak. They have experts that they've gone all the way. They've promoted through schools and universities from the day one. All the universities were on the M&V bandwagon, and they have 5 to 10 PhDs who are PhDs in M&V out of South Africa. So these are people that are driving the discussion on things like uncertainty. Herman Karstens, I'm following his work. So yeah, it's so what the original sin was, and what we haven't really solved from the IPMVP side is it a flexible framework? Is it useful on its own? Or do you have to put further criteria around it when you use it in Dubai? Hi, Hassan. Or, Tom Gephardt. Hey, Tom, I think you signed up. I mean, wherever you use it, how do you explain to people that it's not perfect on its own? It's not sufficient on its own. It needs further elaboration. Yeah, I can stop there, or I can go a little bit further if you want. I can give you an example.
Well, it's just a little ethereal to me. So, because I think this relates to what I wrote about and we discussed earlier, and that is that there's utility people who see things one way, and ESCO people see it a different way. Totally different. We have different needs and all of that, and there's one document, and I don't think it applies to both. I think there should be 2 MVP, one for each of us.
So let me hit back on that one. Okay, you got me going. So the funny thing is, you just said, CMVP, EVO is pushing it more towards utility programs. Well, the further development and some of the application guides, yes. But when we're doing the JTA and the body of knowledge work, a lot of people around the world are saying, I don't care at all about utility programs. So on the CMVP, we're trying to build in more utility program stuff, because there is things like coming out of California and NMEC and all this new language and terminology for paper reports, because California, or the US in general, and California specifically, deployed millions of smart meters. So suddenly option C, or something like it, using whole building data, let's call it option C. Well, it's not option C if you didn't get all the static factors, things like that. So you're right. I believe there's a big opportunity for EVO and others, EVO primarily as the main holder of this, to better define that difference. And there's definitely around the world larger and smaller appetites for any of that program stuff. Again, I'm hearing from most people around the world in larger other markets that project stuff is 99% of it. There are no programs in California or in the US. What's driving energy efficiency is the programs, the utility programs. So
like the
NRA
manual, the non-routine adjustments manual, that never makes it clear if this is for ESCOs or this is for programs. And I got the impression that was really for programs, but ESCO people can use it too, I suppose. But really, some of those methods probably don't work for ESCOs. And that's what's really one of the problems is what you said, context. They never make clear who can use this and who can't. And that's why there should be 2 different documents, or 2 different streams of thought, so that you can't get confused here.
Well, I'm going to go self-promote a little bit. So I'm going to promote Counterfactual Designs, the website we're going to fire up, because I want to go in depth on that from an independent perspective, and have a set of podcasts and create content that just illuminates that distinction, John. Again, when you're in a committee, and you're under timelines and you have a document and someone's funding it, you get the document you get. I was attendant to, I actually believe I had a pretty big role in kicking that thing off, the NRI guide. For those of you that aren't in the lingo, primarily in a contractual situation, you can actually stipulate a lot of things, and you have to assign responsibility when things happen. So there's 3 potential things. The owner changes the facility over the life of the project and the reporting period. The ESCO, the work they did, if there's a service provider, an energy service company, they do something and it messes up, it doesn't work, so there's no savings. So, right? And the third thing is an act of God on the outside. That's what COVID was, or a hurricane or a tsunami, force majeure. So those 3 things can all apply in a contractual situation. And if you're looking at the world, and let's go back to the fundamental bad word in our whole industry. It's the S word. Do you know what I'm talking about? SAVINGS.
Oh, yes, of course.
So it's a fundamental difference. The original sin is not telling people Savings isn't something you go out and find and measure. It's something that's defined in the method you put together. So
That's right.
it will differ depending on how you look at the problem and who you assign responsibility for things. So it's not something that it's to be discovered out in the universe. It's something to be defined, operated, and agreed upon. And there involves a lot of judgment to do that. So that's the first big distinction to make. Now, in contracts, it's really clear that a lot of things have to be arbitrated up front. On the other end, when you get over to the ASHRAE question, and it's close to the utility program thing, they've taken more of a scientific approach, saying, well, what's going to happen? Yeah.
Stop. Okay, so I wanted to tell what they're talking about. I talked to Steve before this. I wanted to go over the difference of a generalized view, a difference of ASHRAE 14 versus IPMVP, and that's what he's getting to right now. So go back to your difference between the two.
Okay, keeping it really, really simple for the 98 people that are still with us here. And by the way, John, did you mention if they're going to have a chance to ask questions?
Yeah. You guys, there's a place to ask questions. Most of you know this because most of you have been here before, but there's a place to ask questions. Hopefully you'll figure it out.
And we'll stop at like 45 minutes in and answer questions. All right. So to me, what I see the big distinction is this contractual on one end of a spectrum of M&V to science on the other. And the scientists say, give me a bunch of buildings and I'll tell you what happened. And they don't really worry about who is responsible. They just look at the baseline, what changed, and they scratch their heads, wow, COVID, and they think about all these things. And, bless everyone's souls, there's a lot of money to be made in consulting on scientific approach to M&V. Actually, I'd like to back up and talk about the history of M&V a little bit, but then I'll go to the other side first. So the spectrum is, on the one hand, the scientific approach, which is what utility programs and mostly ASHRAE have done. ASHRAE looks at the thing as a really, what if we could do everything that was possible with measurements? We'd want to measure this temperature and that flow, and we want to know everything going on to get the real answer to measure savings. And by the way, ASHRAE still, guideline 14, is measurement of demand and energy savings. That's the title of their document. That was like, IPMVP said, no, you can't measure it. It's mainly a contractual design you put together and operate a contract, and you have a resulting number that both parties have to agree to. So I think it's funny that the ASHRAE, is largely populated, heavily influenced by Haberl and the guys at Texas A&M when we were writing the M&V guide. And I was on that committee, and so was Sonderegger and others, and Steve Schiller and John Cowan and all the folks that went over to IPMVP. And yeah, Haberl put together a couple of fantastic, he and his grad students, historical documents recently, because I've been in communication with him over the history of M&V. When was the term M&V first used in its modern context? Well, Jeff Haberl, Dr. Haberl being Dr. Haberl, he went all the way back to the 1880s and said, well, here's the first place he could record in buildings and structures where the guys in France measured with time the speed of exhaust going up a chimney flue to get an idea of movement of air in a building. So it was like the first measurement of something in a building. And he tracks it over through all the decades to how measurements were involved in supporting performance contracting and where they came in. So it's this fascinating, long-term, worthy of a mini series, really. He's got several hundred slides on the history of just measurements in the performance of our daily tasks in the world. So if you're an M&V person, you probably take it for granted that there's going to be meters, or you're going to hang and collect data on the actual energy and stuff. But that wasn't always true, and it didn't really gel into a set of instructions on how to do that until the late 1980s, 100 years afterwards, when things came together that there were enough programs and momentum to want national standards on this topic. So it was like New Jersey, EPRI, a couple others in the late I think in 1988, 89, and then really IPMVP and FEMP were the first modern use of the word M&V. Maybe the New Jersey protocol, but it's really close in that period. So it wasn't back in the 40s or 50s for sure. So again, this idea that you can take measurements in the field, you can design a measurement plan to collect information through measurements that supports the quantification. That's the key thing here. And again, we could not in that original committee decide whether isolated measurement was better than whole building measurement, so we gave people options. And we couldn't decide whether continuous measurement was better than just occasional measurement, so we created option A, frankly. And then later we decided, well, actually, you could even use simulation models, so we'll create option D on the other end. So it all came together in that early period in the early 1990s, and ASHRAE always took the more aggressive approach. Which, here's the deal: they didn't look at it as a cost-benefit analysis. And that transitions to the next thing you wanted to talk about, which was uncertainty. Remember, okay. So, the thing about uncertainty is when you view M&V as fundamentally a balancing of collecting information to reduce uncertainty. You start with a bunch of uncertainty, and the more you can spend some money and reduce it. When you start to see M&V that way, I think a certain viewpoint just gels in your mind. And it becomes really clear, like how the use of tools like Monte Carlo simulations and all these really cool uncertainty and statistics tools can be really useful to the practice of M&V. That's really different than, like you said, the other side of the spectrum with utility programs where they use option C. The meter is assumed. It's just how much noise is in that original signal that you have to deal with for uncertainty. It's uncertainty analysis, but it's a whole different flavor. Well, for those of you that are tracking EVO, we're hoping to capture that concept really heavily in the new uncertainty guide. We're trying to take the uncertainty guide and bring it back to a balance between contractual uncertainty and scientific uncertainty.
Okay, I want to interrupt here. So what Steve and I were talking about earlier was that, and I wrote a paper on this, so hopefully you can find it if you want to. But basically, we have these 4 options, A, B, C, and D. I think you all know that. I'm not going to talk about that. But if you look in the EVO guides, you'll see that they calculate uncertainty for option C. And a lot of times, you'll have fits that aren't that good, and they're saying, yeah, it's a bad fit, you shouldn't use option C, or that's the impression you get. I don't know if it explicitly states that, but I think in ASHRAE they probably would say that. But it's just the implication is, yeah, you shouldn't use option C. There's too much uncertainty here. But the thing is, if you think about it, why aren't they calculating uncertainty for option A? Or option B, or option D. Why? Because the uncertainty would be this huge, whereas option C uncertainty is this huge. Option C is something they can measure. They can't measure uncertainty in the other ones, and therefore that's the only one they focus on. And that's a question people should be asking. But anyway, that was the context of what we just said.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be careful about outing people, but on a recent uncertainty call, it became clear that one of the primary best resources that's hired to perform uncertainty analysis on option C situations learned that we're also trying to include Monte Carlo simulations. I hope that's people can look it up. Whatever. It's estimating uncertainty on a parameter by parameter basis. And being able to simulate it before you even start the project and see which parameters really matter. So it's sensitivity analysis or parametric analysis. It's an advanced form of sensitivity analysis. So when this person realized that the new uncertainty guide was going to have that, he said, "That's fantastic." He goes, "That's what 95% of people that do M&V need. They need an engineering approach to uncertainty that accommodates the fact that some things are stipulated and some things not this highly advanced, mathematical hat matrix stuff that people are using for option C, which, it's useful in some settings, but the other stuff is actually more useful for most engineers." So John, I think you're going to be really happy with the new uncertainty guide.
Okay, I want to interrupt one more time. So one thing, I was talking to Bill Coran recently, and he said, not in front of you guys, just on a phone call, and because I think I was getting on his case for all the uncertainty, because I'm not a big fan of this uncertainty stuff. I just don't like it personally. And for option C, and I was, getting on his case, and he said, "No, but you don't get it. Option C is the best way of doing M&V because you're measuring real stuff. You're doing option A and B and D. You're making these assumptions, these calculations mimic reality, which they do to an extent. They're models, but option C is actual utility data. It is the most accurate way we have it. I know there's lots of problems, and we're not going to go into that. But anyway, continue.
Well, you and I both have huge respect for Bill, and I think that's, if nothing else, just an example of, someone who's dedicated their career, and very successfully, by the way, including creating eCam and other tools that are really useful for everyone in the industry. So thank you, Bill Coran. I hope you're out there and feeling, a pat on the back. Yeah, but I don't know that Bill was there when we were developing option A and B at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and we had buildings where there was the whole building was a random signal, like of unbelievable, volatility. whereas the underlying signal and the lighting was actually fairly tight. And I could just measure the lighting in that building and make a really successful retrofit and verify it with occasional measurements and go, look, everyone involved in this project says we're done if we take a single measurement once a year, confirm by turning all the lights on that still 28 kW, it was 45 before, and there's nothing we need more than that to confirm the concept and do M&V. And no, it's not option C, whole building, but option C, whole building, you get a signal that's just noise. And that's, John, you and I differ on this. I think uncertainty is the best way into M&V. I believe, I just love uncertainty. That's why I think it is the best portal into understanding M&V. And you don't. That's fine. This is the kind of a discussion that makes the world go round. Coran thinks option C is the best one. I think option C has so many challenges that are still like, oh man, I'm nail biting. Yes. Like, you got to make adjustments for every potential thing if it's not a stable operation. And here's the thing. You got to be able to afford to do that. It's not that theoretically you couldn't do it if you had infinite money, but you have to be an M&V plan that doesn't burn all the money up making all these adjustments. And everyone has to see the logic in that to make the project successful. So when you jump in the M&V pool, you got to be ready to swim like, but not just spend all your energy trying to stay above water. That's a parable analogy, but you know what I'm talking about.
This need not be an argument at option C. I think it's more an interview of your ideas, but that's good. That was good. So let's see, what do we got? Oh, compliance.
Yeah.
Compliance. So in the NRE manual, there was a few statements that said this would be in compliance with the IPMVP or something like that. I don't understand this. I thought that it's just a guideline or it's just something, read it, understand the concepts and try to apply them rather than you must apply this stuff or you're out of compliance and you're wrong. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, I can try. And that is also what was the genesis for this talk originally, John, the original sin. And that came out of, and again, I want to, let me just back up and say, thanks to all my colleagues and their hard work and mostly volunteer work at EVO. And even if you're contributing something that I think is 180 degrees different than me, I totally respect that you're contributing volunteer time. And hats off to you. Yeah. So, but if I have a difference of opinion, I'm gonna stop my difference of opinion. And if my experience is different, so in the case of IPMVP, it's really simple for me. The experience of creating it, when we had this group of people who, by the way, that committee in the years 1990, 4, 5, and 6, fought like cats and dogs. And there were threats of congressional retribution and cutting LBL's budget, and we were at each other's throats. And when we launched the FEMP program first, man, people were hot. And I'm going to take you down, Kromer. And so we're used to it's not like this is the first battle I've seen in this industry. And, cooler heads prevail. So the compromise we made when we formed the first 3 options, and then 4, was that, yeah, you can live with contractual folks next to other folks. And what that means is when you take IPMVP and put it in a certain context, like a performance contract, that's where you define how to comply. Or if you put it in the NMEC program in California, that's how they tell you how to comply with NMEC. Or at Bonneville will tell you how to comply. The concepts, simple, are, and let me just do another hats off to my Enron colleagues who were out there, or hats on. So I'll just put my Enron hat on for a little bit. So when I left LBL in late '99 and went to this little company in Texas called Enron, I said, you know what? We're going to do so much better. We're going to take these fundamental concepts, and there were whiteboards on every wall in Houston on the building on Smith Street, and calculus and calculations and nonlinear stuff and all kinds of really like fantastic math. Of course, it didn't add up to much in the end. Kaboof. But at the time, it was an incredibly exciting place to work. And I thought, well, geez, man, we're going to just knock the socks off this M&V stuff, because my job was director of M&V, basically. And I hired a team. And once we started hiring people and going to the field and working with our developers and outside people, it turned out really quickly, oh, shoot, man, we're not going to define our own new Enron language for M&V. IPMVP, they already know it, and it actually fits 80% of the time perfectly well. So we just like said, okay, we're going to adopt IPMVP within Enron. It was just easier, right? And we had a business context that was crazy different from performance contracting in the federal government. But to some degree, the how do you put it? The utility, I won't call it genius, but the utility of IPMVP's structure allowed us to plug it into Enron and work really well. So that was a big learning moment for me. I mean, it wasn't that it was perfect, just that conceptually it had everything we needed to get things way up the ladder. And we put all our window dressing on top of that in terms of how much we would spend and when we'd measure and what to stipulate. So yeah, when Enron allowed me to have a new career, which in 2002, haven't gone back. We took that into the IPMVP and tried to reinforce that. Like, this document is a flexible framework that can be applied in almost any context if you know how to use it right. And that's where, like, the folks in Australia took it and developed their own protocols. Then they came back to teach CMVP. The folks in South Africa took it the furthest. The folks, different countries around the world have taken that same idea. Like, take the core concepts in IPMVP, develop them for your context, for your entire, South Africa, it's the entire country's economy, the federal government, everything down there. It's incredible what they've done. You should really talk to them at some point, right? Yeah, I'll do it. But yeah. So the whole point is, the core concepts are there. They're sound. They're very useful. They're the best thing to teach in a fundamentals class. Someone who's taking a fundamentals class in MNV needs to know what those core concepts are. And frankly, they're documented in FEMP. They're documented now in ISO. They're documented a little bit in ASHRAE. But they're all extrapolated on in little different amounts there.
All right, we're starting to get near the end of our deal, so I wanted to go over a couple last things. One is the future of M&V and your new website, why you're doing it, and what it's going to have.
Right. So this thing got original sin. I think we've handled pretty well, and I think again it's not a big problem.
Before we do, let's see if I want to try to condense it into one sentence.
Right.
The original sin is that these concepts of M&V don't really apply to everyone, and we assume they did, and that you need to put a particular flavor on these concepts, and then it can apply. That is the original sin?
Well, to be useful within
original point.
Yeah, to be useful within any specific program or project, you need to have additional information on that context. How are we going to use it? What's the legal requirements? What are the financial requirements? What are the other people that need to be involved to make these concepts work? They're a great structure.
So in other words, we need different documents for different verticals, one for ESCOs and one for utilities. That's basically it.
Potentially, that may be that's one of the futures of M&V. The other one is, so and I have these 4 words, commercial. How do people make money actually doing this stuff? What are the legal requirements they're within? These are part of these define the context. What's the political situation and the regulatory? What are the regulators telling you can do? Again, we don't even talk about it yet, but in utility programs in California, you have things called code baselines. The counterfactual argument you're comparing to what you should have put in if you'd built code. Or there's also this thing called the dual baseline, which says, well, code kicks in 2014 or 2022. So if a new code comes in next year and you're supposed to have this new piece of equipment, LED or something in, well, the baseline changes based on a theoretical code baseline. These are concepts that all need to be mapped onto. They are mapped on in utility programs now that we need to better explain. So yeah, that's that. And the thing I want to do with counterfactual designs, because it started with a friend who is not in our industry at all, but when I was explaining, when we were talking about uncertainty and statistics, that's again my entry into M&V, and this person is working on other types of programs, resource programs in Africa, but she really quickly got like, oh, you just do a counterfactual design for each project you do. So it was like bingo. A person who's uninformed on our industry can see the primary structure of what we do in minutes. And after that, it's all elaboration. And after that, it's all just communication and illumination of all the different participants. And these are, from regulators, government, clean energy ministerials, all the rest of them. Where is there real meat in our different things like ISO? there's like, Carl this morning was showing me 10 different ISO standards on M&V, right? It's like, what's the exactly? And then you got ASHRAE, and then you got the Australian standards. Then so what's the real meat behind that? Well, we're not going to get to that in a committee meeting. It's going to require like a regular, I'm going to hope to post up podcasts and webinars and develop content to help illuminate how we got here and where we need to go forward. Here's the main thing that is kind of scary is the counterfactual argument or method works best under a stable situation. It works best when what you're measuring in the baseline is unequivocally a fair and accurate comparator for the future. I don't think we have that anymore, man. We have demand response, we have PVs, we have EVs, and energy use and COVID coming. I mean, it will M&V as we know it now will survive in large amounts for a long time, but the future development is going to require some really adept manipulation to address all these changes, and probably an elaboration on the counterfactual argument, including integration of more comparison groups and then a cross-sectional thing, which is what's coming in California. So that's the future of M&V is really.
Back to your context thing. That's all true for the utility sphere, but for the ESCO sphere, we don't need any of that stuff. Am I right? And really, the future is past.
If you're talking about the ESCO side being those who sit down and sign contracts with each other as adults and they follow the contractual reason, absolutely. Again, It's not scientific, but you're right. If it's science, that's going to be, we're going to need to be much more clear about this in the coming years in order to stay relevant. Yeah. So it's a boom time for consultants and people that can explain this stuff well. Because I love education and teaching, right? So anywhere there's a misunderstanding is an opportunity for teaching. That's frankly what I'm focused on for the next 10 years.
I think it's very frustrating personally. Yeah. Okay, so your website, what's the name of the website going to be? Yeah. Or how are people going to find out about it? Are you going to just like email a bunch of people? How are they going to find out? Or you can put it on LinkedIn, I bet you'll advertise.
I put it on LinkedIn already. It's counterfactual-designs.com. And we'll put it in the chat, or you can, you put it. Okay. You can put it. I can bring it up.
Yeah, we'll email for this. Okay, I want to go over some questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the first one. Are there any current level 4 CMVP classes being taught? How would the PMVP compare to the level 4 training?
All right, so PMVA is Performance Measurement and Verification Analyst. And as I understand it, it is the exact material we developed for the CMVP. And so you would go be trained by the same people that were certified trainers, accredited trainers, and you would get the same material for that. There are pilot programs, I guess you'd say, for additional material going on that I know about, mainly in France, where there's an option D class. But I don't know that there's even a design for a full next level course. That's something I don't know about. Right now, the PMVA is equivalent to, I'm seeing a lot of people on my watch hitting the counterfactual designs right now. So welcome everybody. I'm gonna have to change my settings on my notifications because I get hit every time someone signs in. That's the modern world. So the PMVA is gonna be the same as CMVP. The PMVE, again, from what I know, it's already been run, and it's okay. Now you've got your certification as a fundamental person, and maybe you're a project manager and you're never going to go to the field and do M&V. You just need to know enough about it to approve plans or allocate resources. But maybe you're going to actually go and do M&V plans. So the 2-day course you take with PMVEs, you're certified at having taken practical. It's a practical class. And I'm just completely all for that. I think every CMVP ought to go off and take a PMVE now that it's defined by EVO, if they intend to do M&V plans and haven't done it before. That's going to be a great introduction. But level 4, I don't know of any current program for that. EVO's got, I think, on their website, additional courses that are coming under consideration, but that's the best place to learn about that.
Okay, I got a comment from Mark Stats. I guess he, Satish Kumar, and Paul Matthew wrote a paper evaluating the uncertainty of options A and B. So there is a.
Tell Mark to send it to me. I'll put it on my web. I'll put it on Counterfactual Designs right away, and we'll interview him about it. That's the kind of thing we're going to do. Like, what's out there? What can we bring together and bring it to everyone's attention?
Okay, let's hold on a second. I'm looking for a question.
Mark knows where to find me.
I have a lot more answers than questions. So sorry. This is a really bad question interface here. Damn. Okay, there you go. Is the PMVA equivalent to the CMVP? I thought they were the same, aren't they?
It's right now, as far as I know, it's exactly the same thing. Like I said, we're the CMVP, as per protocol, per natural protocol, every 5 years we update the body of knowledge. And we've just gone through that exercise, and they're going to create new training materials. So the CMVP will be hopefully enhanced, but primarily the same information, the same content, with maybe some slightly different interpretations. But for that time being, I think they're equivalent.
Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize some of the things you said in a lot simpler and simpler way, or less words. Compliance. Basically, what you said is the IPMVP or their documents, they're not the ones who should be saying you comply or not. It's specific programs that should say you comply or not. A utility program might say that, or maybe FEMP might say that, but not the IPMVP itself. Is that your?
Well, let me just back off that a little bit. I think generally yes, but the thing, when you say you comply with IPMVP, you comply with a set of principles. And those principles are more fully articulated in each different context. But there's that openness, conservativeness, because there's a lot of judgment involved, right? To the degree that's not an algorithm, to the degree there's any judgment involved, what IPMVP is all about is saying professionals that use the language should use it in a certain way such that it's transparent, repeatable, conservative, those type of things. So complying with IPMVP was always a really general judgment and ethics almost type direction, not specifically how are you going to deal with this baseline or this CMV, coefficient of variation, root mean squared, or whatever else.
The NRA-NRE manual says if you do it this way, you are complying.
So the NRE document was written and funded by utility folks. It's true, and they had specific needs for it. And yeah, we can have a separate call on that later, maybe, and bring in Leah and others and about explaining that. It definitely needs to be explained. That's part of the original sin, man. Again, not to be detrimental to anybody, just it's caused confusion. And if something causes confusion, then it's like, we need to elaborate on this. We need to illuminate what happened. Not point fingers and say it's bad, but say, oh, I see what happened. It was supposed to, it went that way. And that's what we have. We have now words on paper in a document. They're the result of committees, and they're necessarily a reduction in information than everything that could have been there.
Okay. Okay, another summarization. The difference between ASHRAE and IPMVP, at least the older IPMVP, the difference is that ASHRAE was more, they addressed this science and thing either passed the test or didn't pass the test. They just looked at data, instrumentation, etc. Whereas IPMVP, at least the older versions, were all about contracts. And that this is a contract, and it's not so important that it is scientific. It's that we agree on the terms and we're playing by the game that's outlined in the contract. That was the difference. I mean, IPMVP's changed since, in the last 5 years or so, but that was the difference, correct, more or less?
I don't think IPMVP has changed that much. There's been some leanings that way, but that is very clear. That's pretty, I would agree with that distinction. That ASHRAE, here's why. Again, backing up, just reinforcing. ASHRAE, I don't believe ever talks about costs. It doesn't have an inherent cost-benefit analysis built into doing the M&V, which says in order to know how much to spend, you've got to know what it's worth to do it. And IPMVP did have that embedded. It's saying, you need to also justify how much M&V you do based on something. And there's earlier versions had this explicitly stated: reduction of uncertainty. The reduction of uncertainty was a principal means by which you could arbitrate how much M&V to do. If you can't reduce uncertainty any further by spending more money, don't spend the money, right? If it's just too expensive to put that better meter in, then live with the uncertainty. And that was again what I always thought was the most interesting part of the construct of the whole conceptual framework of IPMVP was it was a uncertainty reduction judgment call for every situation you walked into the field, because every building in the field is different. There are opportunities for collecting information, metering, stuff like that.
Okay, so we've got just a few more minutes. People are starting to drop. We've lost 7, but we had 100 at one point. That's really good for us. Is there any other points you would like to make?
Yeah, I guess.
My list.
I guess I think I've said it all. I'd really love to hear more feedback from the crowd. That's what's going to make this. I think I've said the main things. I'm not pointing fingers when I say original
This one.
sin. Yeah.
Okay. If there's one section you would add to the IPMVP, what would it be? That's a really good question. That's a really good.
Concepts and context, an explanation of this range of context that you might find yourself in, and then what to do if you find yourself in a contract versus a program versus a scientific exercise, and how that'll influence your whole thing, your budget, your approach. Again, remember, in utility programs, they sample from a population of participants. So you have 1,000 people doing the program. They take 10 or 100, 10 or 20 probably, and then they spend a lot of money on those 10. Right? So the M&V that you do on a utility program is typically you have much more money to go study it because you're going to extrapolate that result across a large number of projects. So you can afford to do that. When you're doing contractual M&V on site-by-site project, the money you spend on that project gets billed to that project. You don't get to extrapolate it or spread it out across other projects. So it's got to be reduced. So yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I got another question. So the whole term stipulate, or no, option A, there seems to be different understandings of what option A means. So I've seen that the one is that we measure stuff once and then some stuff, not everything. We measure some things once and then never again. And I think in FEMP, maybe I'm wrong, but you're supposed to measure it every year for it to be classically option A, or at least something would say that. And then some people would think option A is just stipulate everything. Like, look, it's just this much. And can you explain the differences, or what is supposed to be option A, or has it evolved?
It's definitely evolved. And here's the deal. I'll put it out there. It's going to be recorded, but I still believe option A is in the document because LBL's experience with the pilot program, and specifically our experience with the lighting at Building 62, where we didn't need to measure the hours of operation because it was a lab building and it was a wildly fluctuating number of hours of operation. So we took a number out of the air and we said, look, roughly 4,000 hours a year. That's how many hours a year this building's on. But we had the opportunity, because it was on a single riser electrically, to measure the entire lighting load with one measurement. So we fixed all the lights up and we got a baseline of 42 kW. And we said, okay, that's our baseline. What can you do, ESCO? They came in, they changed all the lights, took another measurement, and got 28 kW. So we would go back in once a year, make sure they'd prepared stuff and make sure the thing was still 28 kW. And that was sufficient for us. It was a pre and post measurement. And this gets back all the way to Dr. Haberl. And the question is, what minimum amount of measurement? You want some measurement in the field. So to me, option A was always, it got even more obscure. It was find the one thing that you can measure that is the best indicator that the thought process of the ECM worked. And but if you think about it, if you're on a committee and you have to have a minimum threshold for a measurement and a verification protocol, there's got to be a measurement in the field. So we would sort of laughingly say option A is find that one thing that everyone can agree on is the minimum measurement and measure that. And after that, everything else can be stipulated. But no, you can't just do stipulation. You can't just have an engineering calculation. And again, it was, I think if Mark or someone else talked about it, but to me, the use of Monte Carlo simulations upfront or a parametric or sensitivity analysis, what would be my most cost-effective measurement? That's the thing you're trying to find for option A. What's the one thing that I can measure quickly, easily, cheaply that's going to have the most impact on the final uncertainty? And if I can find that and implement it, then that's good. But
aren't there some standards or documents, whatever, say you need to do a measurement every year? Not measure everything, but you need to measure every year, and they call that option A. If you don't only, like what you did at LBNL. But some of them say you just have to measure it once, and you don't need to measure the LEDs the second, third, and fourth year. You just measure them once, you're done.
We're going to run out of time, and here's upcoming. But I just want to say on that score, Denny Tanguay at Evo and I at one point last summer came up with a year-by-year analysis of how option A, B, and C were defined in various versions from 96, 97, 98, 2000, and how it evolved, right? Good. So, I mean, at some point we can make that public and just show you that there's been an evolution, and I'm not always sure it was in the right direction. I think it clouded things more than clarified them, but that's just one man's opinion. But yeah, things like that could be useful.
I think we got to stop, unfortunately. So, okay. We got 1 minute left. We have more. So these are the webinars coming up. Steve, thank you. Thanks so much. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. Next week next month we're doing one on measuring at the circuit level. There's these companies out there, and there's companies that sell the products and some that just do their performance contracting that way, where they just measure every circuit in a panel. And they're way into it. It's gotten really cheap to do that. And I think that would be, it's an interesting idea. If it's something you're not going to do, it's still an interesting idea because you might actually choose to do it sometimes. April, let's see what, April will be interesting. We're going to do, so Lionel Hill is state of Maryland, and I think he's done like 30 or 40 performance contracts himself. I mean, he was the client. So he's worked with 1 million ESCOs, not 1 million, maybe 10. And he's got a lot of, let's say, wisdom, we've gained a lot of wisdom over the years. I think that'll be really interesting. May 11th, we're going to do something on steam traps. And on the 8th, we're going to do lighting. And the lighting is going to be interesting. It's not just, LEDs save energy. That's boring. We're going to talk about measuring lights, and I've noticed some really strange things when I measure fluorescence. And I don't understand it. Actually, I just had a conversation with Greg Kerpiel, and he explained a lot of it to me just today. But why is it that fluorescence, they seem that the power kind of moves up as the longer you wait? Why is that? And why do they bounce around so much on your meter? What's that about? And then why are some lamps, they're supposed to be 32 watts and only 26? Why? And so we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. All right, that's it. If you have any questions, Tyler, what's our next slide? I think there's an email address. If you have any questions or anything you want to ask us later on, do email us and we will get them answered. We'll send them over to Steve to answer or whatever. And thanks for coming. This will be recorded. And if you want to see the recording and you don't see it, email us here and we will get you a copy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John.